Welcome to this webinar, IoT Predictions Report 2021. My name is Martin Whitlock. I'm the CTO at Telenor Connection. Telenor Connection is part of the Telenor Group, which is in turn one of the biggest operators in the world with 180 million subscribers across primarily Europe and Asia. Telenor Connection, then, we are the IoT company within the group, and we have been pioneers in IoT for some 20 years, originally serving customers like Volvo, Hitachi, Verisure, and others, who have in turn also been pioneers within their respective fields in connecting things. Nowadays, we serve more or less any vertical within the IoT space, and we are represented in many different markets, from the US in the West to Japan and China and Korea and so on in Asia, and then of course a number of locations in Europe and Nordics and even South Africa these days. We are since some time ago leaders in the Magic Quadrant from Gartner within IoT, which we're of course very proud of. We are here today basically to go through the findings, or some key findings at least, from a report that we have been producing together with Nord Stream, part of Accenture. This is something that we've done now for at least 3 years with different topics. I think first we talked about how IT will drive the connected economy, and then we went into last year predictions on IT and how they play a role in fighting climate change. And this year we have a focus on IT solutions and how they will impact supply chains and making them more cost efficient, flexible and resilient. And that's why we have this webinar today. I should also say that it's perfectly okay to post questions, and there is a question field in the GoToWebinar which you could use for that, and then I will try to answer these questions towards the end of the presentation. But with that, let's move on. Global supply chains are under pressure to transform, and why do we say that? Well, I think it's fair to say that looking back in the last couple of decades, we know that international trade has been one of the strong drivers for global economy, and that is of course something that supply chains need to help fulfill. We need to make sure that the raw materials and goods are transported into the right places, and the produced goods are reaching out to the consumers or enterprises that need them. And in doing so, we of course have to have global supply chains that are delivering these services with reduced administration, making sure that lead times are as short as possible, maintaining stock at a sufficient level but not too high because that is too costly, and so on. And that is something that of course grows in complexity the more interactions and things that has to be considered. And therefore, manual processes which have been used a lot in the past have more and more become insufficient. And here we come in with IoT solutions as one of the complements to this, making sure that we have automated and data-driven processes to help us. We also must make sure that data is not kept in silos, but are made available between the different players, part of the total end-to-end supply chain, to not sub-optimize within one part of the supply chain, but rather make sure that everything runs smooth from start to end. I think one of the developments that we cannot ignore these days is of course the COVID-19 pandemic, which I think have really accelerated a lot of the concepts that we are talking about here today. Even before the pandemic started, we had things like trade conflicts, the US-China trade conflict being one example, that had impact on supply chain, availability of material and so on. And then comes the COVID-19 on top of that, where we all know that we had situations where workforces had to stay home, thereby impacting the productivity of factories and so on. Of course, transportation cross-border became more and more complex, and so on. So at the end of the day, we know that the supply chains and the enterprises that are part of it need to have the ability to do rapid reprioritization of the production and shift focus. And even it could be so that the demand of goods could shift basically overnight due to a thing like the pandemic, where the things that we consumed before had to be shifted into facial masks. And nowadays, of course, the transportation and the availability of vaccine for the COVID-19 is of highest urgency. So this is something that influence all of us, and of course, including the supply chains. And what does it mean in practice then? Well, I think that there are, of course, a number of different aspects that could be related to the supply chains. But overall, I think we're talking about structural things and organizational things and things that has to be end-to-end. So it's not only about technology and IT, of course. We also need to make sure that people are organized properly, that we have processes that support everything that we need to be doing, and so on. So, but that said, technology and IT is, of course, one driver that plays a big part of making the supply chains more automated and better. Then, which you could see also if you download the report and read it, we can divide it into some subcategories of what we have to focus on. And one thing is, of course, cost efficiency, making sure that we optimize everything across the production and the logistics flows and what have you that is related to the supply chain, that we can identify and eliminate inefficiencies. And this, of course, to a large extent driven by access to information and data. I mentioned that we need to look at it end to end, and this means that we need to be able to interact between different parts of the supply chain. So, for instance, if there's different logistics partners involved in across the logistics flow, the information needs to be passed on and so on, making sure that we have a good information flow there. We can talk also about resilience. I mentioned the trade conflicts that we knew since before. We do know that looking at the global supply chain, there are always economical and political environments that are changing. That means that having a single source of supply, one way of getting access to your goods or equipment, that is probably something that you need to review if you have a high dependency on certain things. You need to have alternative and options, and primarily understand the vulnerabilities that you're exposed to, so that you can prepare yourself for that, shifting in different suppliers and having alternatives, but also inform your customers about potential problems, so that if you have a disruption of some sort, make sure that your customers are aware of this and know what to expect, and thereby you can at least manage the expectations properly. Flexibility, obviously important. We talked about the COVID-19 situation now, but we have also, apart from the pandemic, of course, continuous change in competition and fluctuation in demands, which means that you need to be able to replan properly. You need to be able to scale, and that goes probably both up and down. In order to do that, you need to have the production environment that can cope with this. And this goes also end to end. You need to have machinery that are available and that are able to produce a number of different things, not being tailored to only one production chain that can take a very long time then to change, but rather have multi-purpose production chains. You need processes and of course the logistics flows that follows in order to be that flexible and agile that the world requires these days. And finally, traceability. And here, of course, IT comes in a very important way to visualize what is happening to your supply chain end to end. go away from manual data collection into automated data collection so that you can continuously visualize and integrate your systems with other players in your vicinity, and then ultimately also do the proper analytics and take the actions required. And here obviously things like artificial intelligence and other concepts come into play as well, so that these decisions are taken by machines and systems in real time rather than people who have to do it in manual manner. So looking at the typical supply chain then, I think most of us recognize this. We have everything from the raw materials and components that we need to produce our goods, which are typically then done in a manufacturing plant of some sorts. Then we have the distribution chain, where the goods are shipped out from the factory, probably stored somewhere in a local warehouse or so on, until it is transported into its final destination, which could be then a retail if it's a consumer goods or some other sorts. I won't go through this any more detail in this, but rather say that this is what we need to relate to when we talk about the supply chain. And what I will do next here is to go through a few different examples of where this is coming in play and how IoT and technology can help out. Starting off then in the manufacturing sense, I think having a manufacturing that is maximizing uptime and productivity is of course of utter importance. So you don't want your manufacturing plant to be down by any reason. This goes of course from shortage of material, or that production line or machinery is broken or something like that. So within the manufacturing concept, what we see now is that due to concepts of Industry 4.0 and other modernization programs, of course, the manufacturing plants get more and more connected with sensor and real-time analytics in order to make sure that everything is working as it should, and also, in best case, prevent downtime, actually detecting problems before they occur. I think this is done in many different ways. I can relate to ourselves. We are working with a lot of manufacturers of goods that from when they sell it, they introduce their own sensors and analytics to make sure that their machinery is working properly at all times, and selling that even as a service to the ones utilizing these products in the end. I think one thing that is also very important these days, and maybe also accentuated by the pandemic, is the ability to do then remote expert monitoring utilizing the sensors and the connectivity in the manufacturing plants. If a pandemic like the COVID-19 prevents traveling, for instance, it's of course extremely convenient to make sure that the experts of the machinery, usually the experts then coming from the manufacturer themselves, can remote go in and make sure that they can provide services for the manufacturing plant owner to make sure that everything is working smooth, and maybe even helping optimizing or changing then the production environment with new configurations and that can be then applied with over the air, so that the machine suddenly can be used in a different context than it was used yesterday. Here, of course, connectivity and IoT is playing a very important part. For becoming more flexible and efficient, of course, automation and human aid is very important. We do see now that augmented reality and virtual reality come in play, using glasses, where a manufacturing plant worker can also once again maybe be aided by remotely by some expert from the manufacturer of a machine or whatever, use augmented reality to see information digitally on top of what they see with their own eyes, help increase efficiency and open up for brand new concepts. We also have a shift going from robotics into cobots and other solutions that actually help and interact with humans, and maybe offloading some of the tasks that are either repetitive or mundane and therefore not suitable for humans to do themselves, or even dangerous activities that are very close to dangerous machinery or in environment like spray painting that are not good for your lungs and stuff like that. So having these things connected then and being able to interact with each other helps increase productivity. Finally, also workers' health, I think has always been important, of course, but we also see that now in a different light of things with the pandemic, actually, where it's not only about making sure that humans are not too close to dangerous robots and stuff like that, but we also need to make sure that physical distances between humans are kept so that we can still have people at the workplace, but without risking contamination from the COVID-19, for instance. So having health monitoring workforce systems that keep track on everything from environment in the manufacturing plant and things are becoming more and more important, of course. Moving into next section, transport and logistics. I think that from a customer perspective, you of course want to know when to expect delivery. You want to be aware of potential delays of your deliveries, and you want to most likely also know what's the environmental impact of the delivery. So that is what you expect as a customer, and then from an enterprise perspective, you also expect other things. You want to know, where is my cargo right now? You want to reduce loss and theft, of course, improve the delivery times to make sure that you have things delivered more quicker, and then reduce cost. I think all this boils down to information, and where is the goods and what are the environmental impact that the goods are experiencing right now. I think there are a lot of good examples here of how this can be done. Looking at our own customer base, for instance, we have solutions like Visilian that we work with together with Sony. It's just an asset tracking and supply chain visibility platform solution where you can in real time see all the things that I mentioned, including having sensors following the shipment with humidity and temperature sensors, and so that you can really make sure that you follow the flow of your goods and that it has not been exposed to something that could be harmful for the goods. In this case, we also utilize new technologies like LTM for connectivity. LTM is a mobile technology that builds on 4G, but it allows reduced power management, for instance, or power consumption, I should say. It's leaner, meaning that you can have battery operated sensors that follow the logistics from end to end, but at all times have the ability to report the data that you need to know. I think also this pandemic, once again, I mean, of course, now that the vaccine shipments are taking place, obviously this is super critical that we get that delivered in time, and also that the vaccine itself is not exposed to anything that is harmful along the way. We have different customers of ours that work with this, but one is M2 Cloud, for instance, who's focusing entirely on healthcare transports, where they have sensors attached to the cooling equipment that take vaccines, for instance, during the transportation, and they're utilizing QR codes to individually track each and every shipment so that the staff and the hospital can scan this and get a full life cycle information of how the goods have taken place. Of course, extremely important. The other side of the transport and logistics is to optimize the entire fleet management of logistics, making sure that you optimize the route depending on the various different parameters, such as how big is the truck, what are the weather conditions, and what other goods could be co-shipped, and so on. So the route optimization and on management of a big fleet to reduce cost and reduce lead times is of course super critical. Also, adding to that, the telematics and the monitoring of the vehicles themselves to notice whenever something has been worn out or needs to be replaced in the vehicles, to instead of having a critical downtime where the vehicle becomes stranded somewhere, fix this preventively to make sure that you always have the fleet up and running. Then the driver behavior is something that also we know that a lot of our customers are using telematics for, to make sure that you can see that if you have a driver, for instance, that drive aggressively and thereby either pose a risk to the vehicle or themselves or co-traffickants, monitor this and make sure that you can coach that driver properly to adapt. So here in this field, we of course also have different customers, but I think one is Mixed Telematics, who do this from a global perspective. I think they operate in 120 countries or so across 6 continents with more than 600,000 vehicles connected, and that of course helps once again to make sure that we have this global supply chains with great visibility also in the fleet management space. Finally, I would like to just briefly mention warehouse automation as well. Warehouses are of course critical in the supply chain. That's where we do all the shifting in local and global distribution. And rather than doing that manually, having automated systems to increase efficiency will help faster operations and also reduce manual errors, and hopefully also reduce the workforce risk, which we were talking about earlier as well. Here we know that some players in the industry today have gone into fully automated warehouses, utilizing artificial intelligence to make sure that you optimize the packing. And this is of course something that becomes even more relevant depending on what type of warehouse you're talking about. If it's an Amazon retail warehouse where you actually do the pickups for consumer deliveries, and then you probably need to have a lot of different tools in place in order to even cope with the vast volumes that are passing through these warehouses on a daily level. Historically, I think there's been pick-to-light systems and stuff like that supporting humans, but now that is becoming more and more into automated autonomous vehicles maybe, that themselves go around and pick the right stuff from the right shelves. And of course, the connectivity and the networks that are in use here, specifically if you go into autonomous driver vehicles in combination with humans, you need to have reliable networks in place to cope with that. So I think this was just a few different touch points that relates to the supply chain, and of course you are more than welcome to download the paper as such and see if you can find anything more interesting and insightful there. And I would like to thank you all for attending. This will be available online. The document is available for download on our webpage if you want to read more, and otherwise please reach out to any connection touchpoint for any further questions. So thank you very much for today.